Hello, and welcome back to the Wooks Books Book Club for our discussion of this month's book. In March, we read The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi, Shannon Chakraborty's fifth published book. Shannon is a historical fantasy and speculative fiction author based out of New Jersey. Her debut novel, The City of Brass, released to acclaim in 2017, and she went on to wrap up the associated Devabad trilogy in 2020, with an additional story collection releasing in 2022. In 2023, she followed those stories up with our book for March, The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi, a book praised as one part heist story and one part magical adventure by Paste Magazine. That is meant to be a swashbuckling adventure on the high seas with magical twists woven in for good measure, with some people calling it Ocean's 11 meets the Pirates of the Caribbean. Amina's story released to much fanfare across the internet. In 2024, it was nominated for a Hugo Award for Best Novel and currently enjoys a 4-star rating on Goodreads and Amazon. I, having not been looking into books on the internet in 2023, missed out on all of that fanfare and ran across this title on a Library of a Viking video toward the end of last year. I chose this book to be the second of our 2025 book club because it sounded like an interesting seagoing adventure, filled with ships and swashbuckling and magic, and is that a kraken on the cover? I am in! And I was wrong. There is very little buckling of swashes in this book, at least not as much as I anticipated, but more on that later. We enter Amina's story after it has ended. The great pirate captain is retired and is now struggling to keep her home leak-free, her daughter safe, and her mother happy, all while hoping the things she has done in the past, the things that have made up that story, do not come back to haunt her and her family. But sadly, due to unforeseen events, trouble lands on her doorstep. And that trouble is very familiar with the tales and adventures that have made up the early parts of this legend forming itself around Amina's life. So much so, they're able to leverage the details against her and her family. Then, with the addition of a large fortune bribe, that leverage is used to pry the reluctant Nakuda from her clifftop home and back out into the world on one last job. You may have noticed I did little to mention what the job is or who the person doing the blackmailing is. This is a book club after all. I expect you have read the book, so I won't shy away from spoilers. It's just that I don't think the details are super important. Asif's daughter is kidnapped. Her grandmother bribes and blackmails Amina to save her. Important for the plot. But for what the book is about? For me, The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi is as much a story about stories, tales and legends, as it is about Amina's struggle to save Dunya from the evil Frankish sorcerer Falco. The book goes to great lengths to tell us how important Amina's reputation is. Yes, this tells us how much of a badass she has been in her past. Yes, this gives us some world building and some insight into her history with the world in which she exists. But since Amina is the one relating the story to Jamal the scribe, it is also a small insight into Amina's own concern about the story that has brought her this far. It's a way for Amina to show concern for the legend she has already built in days past without her having to say it out loud. But why? Because, as we go on to learn deeper in the novel, legends and stories are important in this world. Amina stands on her own reputation a couple of times, probably most notably when convincing the pirates of Socotra to help her in the final battle. Her chaos demon husband Rask is obsessed with building her legend. Asif sells his soul, whether by accident or otherwise, for a greater legend, so he can return home to Dunya's mother and grandmother as the big man, with riches and tales that will enthrall them, and prove he is worthy of whatever it is he feels he needs from them. To prove his family is capable of living up to their supernatural treasure-hunting legacy. Stories have power. even when they are the stories inside of the story we care about. The story of how Amina and her crew have to save the missing daughter of a departed beloved crewmate. Now, just as important as what's included in all legends is who gets to be included in them. Having people we relate to within stories is just as important, if not more important, than the story itself. Being able to see myself as Luke Skywalker, wanting to be Commander William T. Riker, is a big part of who I am, and it is easy to see why. Not just because I share a first name with Riker, his middle initial also happens to be my older brother's name, but because they were like me. Luke was a whiny teenager who got to go on and do wondrous things, like I wanted to be. Riker got to have the cool beard and sit on chairs weird, like I would when I landed my first leadership position. Yes, I leaned to the side of my office chair like all great Starfleet captains. But obviously, without beating around the bush, what made it easiest for young me to see myself as them was the fact the three of us are white. I might not have realized that was a reason I gravitated towards them as a child, but looking back and understanding how representation works now as an adult, it was definitely a reason. Amina's story is about a Muslim woman leading a ship of men. The only other woman I recall being on board was Dalila, from all around the Indian Ocean. It has racial and religious diversity to spare, and a whole video could be done, and I'm sure has been, on that, by people better suited to it than me. But I do want to touch briefly on the other form of representation in the book. When I built out the list for this year's book club, I chose each month's books according to my own internal logic. Some are obvious: Dracula in October, The Father Christmas Letters in December. Others, not so much. Hemingway in September, because that's Lauren Bacall's birth month, and her and Bogey, a favorite actor of mine, met on the set of To Have and Have Not, a movie based on a Hemingway book. Amina I picked for March because I was excited to read it, so I gave myself the cookie early on. It was at this planning stage that my sister asked why I didn't put Amina in June, Pride Month, because it's LGBTQ friendly. And I had to explain that, for one, I was using this weird non-system to choose the months, and that my only real knowledge of the book came from this one recommendation online. So I had no idea it had community representation in it. And she wasted no time in explaining that there is, in fact, LGBTQ plus representation in it, and how she had seen it pop up as recommendations as she reads a lot of sapphic works. So I go into this book with a new expectation of not only swashbuckling, but now LGBTQ plus representation. And sure enough, here comes Tinbu and Yusuf. A gay Hindu and Jewish couple, boom, right there in the first major action beat of the getting the band back together part of the story. And then, boom, there they go. Yusuf stays in Aden, and that's kind of it. Except for the handful of references back to Yusuf and a throwaway line about Tinbu preferring men every so often. Our gay couple is gone. Then, another moment of trans representation. We find out that Dunya, Asif's missing child, is trans. Rock on. Here we go. Back into representation territory. And they're left on the ship. And the story doesn't need it mentioned again. Until the very end, when we find out Dunya and Jamal are the same person. I'm not going to lie, my reaction to this in my initial look back over the book and getting ready for this video was not good. The more I thought about it, the more it struck me that Chakraborty had buried her gaze. I feared that Tinbu and Yusuf and Jamal had been implanted into the book as virtue signaling, only to have these defining traits left by the wayside. So I sat back and I thought about it. I talked to my sister about it, and I reoriented my expectations a bit. Had I not been told that this is a key thing in the book, had the new expectation from earlier not been added, that weight not been hoisted onto the book, what would my reaction to this have been? because I liked the book, but this sudden thing was becoming a problem for me. And after thinking about it, had I not been given the heads up, I would have been delighted to find these characters naturally, in their LGBTQ glory, in the pages of Amina Al-Sirafi. So what does that mean for my initial knee-jerk thoughts about gay burying and virtue signaling? There will come a time, despite the way the world feels right now, when we will be post-Pride. I don't mean Pride as a thing will go away. I mean Pride as a protest will go away. One day, there will be no reason to have to protest for LGBTQIA plus rights, because they will just be a natural part of this world. And people will look back and think how dumb we all were for needing Pride as protest. And they will know it as only a celebration of equality and a way of honoring those who lived through the dark times the community is currently experiencing. In this post-Pride as protest world, this book's level of representation will just be how books are written, and should be how they are currently written. Oh look, a gay couple. Of course they're in the book. They're people. Why wouldn't they be in the book? A total normalization of LGBTQ existence because it is normal. And their appearance in fiction should be as regular as their existence in the real world is. Despite my knee-jerk reaction, Chakraborty did not bury her gays. She treated them as normal couples. One of them stayed behind because he wasn't needed for the plot. Dunya's journey into Jamal is quick at the end of the book because that's Jamal's story, not Amina's. Their inclusion in her legend is what is important for our world. It will one day be a representation of early works alongside many others that worked toward putting a marginalized and mistreated community where they belong, on pages, in stories, as everyday people. So, more people in the world can have their Luke Skywalkers and their William T. Rikers. Alright, now, back to the buckles that weren't swashed. All legends have one thing in common. They're told. How they are told may be different. Gilgamesh is different from Hercules, is different from Indiana Jones. But the way they are told is important. Now, I happen to have liked the way this one was told. I think Chakraborty turns a pretty phrase. I think she does a great job of pulling you along with the story, for the most part. There are a few places where it slows down, but never so bad I set down the book and didn't want to come back to it. But one area I really felt like this was most obvious was the action. Our first encounter with Amina is a tense action beat, with magic and knives and a mysterious fog rolling towards her small fishing boat. It's well written and serves as a solid introduction to who Amina was, and then immediately into the aches and pains which are part of who Amina is. Our next action beat, the freeing of Tinbu and the Marawati in Aden, is a good escalation of the action. We now have a crew to worry about. We get to see Dalila's skills at work, as well as a rusty Amina's nerves as she stares down the warship that blocks her exit from Aden's ports. It's a good second action scene, and we can expect the story to build on it. I am a big fan of escalating action and character power and abilities. It bothers me when the next fight or bad guy in a story is weaker than the last one. I'm looking at you, Legend of Korra, and the Mighty Ducks movies. Then we get the fight with Falco's men on the beach. They overpower her because they are supernatural. Her friends save her. All right, I'm on board. Fine. We have seen some of the bad guy's power now. We know a little bit about what we are up against. And we run away to be chased by the crack, Marid. Now here we are, running away on the Marawati. The skies darken, the tension builds, and here it comes. The single thing promised on the cover of the book. Well, the American cover. In rolls the Kraken. Marid. I mean what you know. And the fight stalls out. You're expecting a mini boss fight. Though it is called something else, we are expecting a fight with a Kraken. But it never really emerges. The crew never gets involved. Amina is the only one who tackles any martial action, and we get a short sequence against the Marid, followed by a short sword fight with the BBEG. The short fight with the BBEG would have been fine if we had the larger ship-to-monster combat I had been expecting against the Kraken, but without it, it's diet frosting on a Weight Watchers cake. Our next major action beat, because I don't count Amina falling through some clouds as an action beat, is the storming of Falco's camp with the pirates from Socotra. Their ship draws the weakened Marid away, and we get Amina and some pirates versus Falco's men. Again, well written. Delilah and Tinbu show their mettle while Rask doesn't, and off-screen, presumably, our Kraken fight is happening in some form. Until an unseen Falco calls it back to the land to kill Amina. The final fight with the Marid is pretty good. Amina working to free the creature while it attacks her is alright, I guess. But I still wanted my 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea moment. I still wanted tentacles in danger of destroying a ship, which I really do feel like I was promised by the American cover of the book. And the arrival of the Socotran pirates with their ship really made me think this is where we would get it. The Marawati is safe in its plot armor, but Magnan's ship is disposable. But no go. We get a good fight on the ground with Amina winning out, and I was happy with the Marid's connections to Falco were broken, and it ran free, but in a I was promised tacos and got pizza kind of way. Nothing wrong with pizza, but I was looking forward to tacos. Then the final fight with Falco Aldebaran was a letdown. Amina's new abilities had been hyped since she got them, and while she is obviously now stronger than the Frank, we don't get any time to observe it. The fight is over in a short clash, with a brief appearance from a giant snake I kind of forgot had been teased, and then the Marid knocks down a hole in the wall, and Aldebaran is freed, and it's all over. Every time the action gets going, it then falls flat on its face. The engine revs, the clutch is dropped, but the car is in neutral, which is sad, because I liked the early scenes when the author commits to the fights, but it just didn't pan out past the midpoint of the book. Let's loop back to the fight with the Marid for a second, the first one. There's something there I want to touch on again. Who fights the Kraken? Tinbu gets pinned under a broken part of the ship. Majed gets to beg to be allowed to stay. Delilah says she's going to prepare for the fight, and Rask steals the boat. Then some unnamed sailors, they fall from the ship, but the only person who does anything productive is Amina. The only person who is really effective against Falco's men during the final attack is Amina. At least of the named characters, Magnan's pirates kick butt. And Delilah and Tinbu work together to take down what's-his-name. But in a story with multiple characters and a whole crew that we barely know, why is Amina the only one who gets to do anything meaningful? The story is told from her point of view, so it's understandable that Amina's story is what gets told. And I have seen that used as the reason why the other characters come off as flat and generic at times. What was Delilah's motivation for joining the crew again? Did Majed have any reservations about leaving his family in Mogadishu? But it's no excuse for leaving the other characters with nothing accomplished. The named members of the crew really are just along for the ride. Unless your name is Rask. Then you get to have some page time for who and what you are and why you are the way you are. Speaking of Amina's chaos creature husband and demonic booty call, I wanted to ask your opinion on something. How evil is Rask? Like, truly. The most evil things we know he has done is marry a drunk woman and use her culture's prenuptial agreement as a magical contract, and maybe steal the soul of a fellow sailor, thus leaving him a soulless husk when he dies from a plague. Though, if we believe his retelling of what happened with Asif, which is the only real telling we get of what happened between him and Asif, he set those circumstances up by accident. he didn't mean to grant Asif's request for a legendary life, stating it was beyond his abilities. While untimely, was making a sarcastic quip about it costing the beloved crew member his soul really enough to condemn him as evil? As far as whether or not his account is accurate, I would point out we see Amina lie more often than Rask. It seems if there is one thing about him we can assume, it's that he can be surprisingly honest, all things considered. So what is he? A coward? Sure. Incompetent? Seems like it. A liar? Maybe. But true and purely evil? Like in the same way Falco is? You have to convince me in the comments. As I said earlier, to me, Amina's story is about stories. And stories are important in her world, just as they are in ours. Stories are friends we turn to when no one else will listen. They're how we comfort ourselves. They're how we relate to new people. They're so much more than just words on paper or sounds spoken by actors. And in the world we live in today, a world where Doc Holliday, Robin Hood, and Gilgamesh have long since died, and no one has risen to take their place as the walking, talking legends of the day, stories, whether they be Amina's, Iron Man's, or Kin's, are all the more important. And Amina realized why in the book. After beating Falco, when they're underway back to Aden, she takes a brief moment to think on what her legends will mean to other people. That her story could be the inspiration for someone else's. Some kid with more imagination than means, as she says. Or another woman who needs someone to look back on to say, if she can do it, so can I. Her brief pre-coital reflection drove home this idea about what this book is really about, and got me to reflect on the purpose of the things I'm creating. What is their purpose? Because I am definitely not writing great works of literature. And what do they mean to me, and could they mean to others? And it boiled down to this. Adventures and legends are just tales and stories, which in turn are dreams written down. Dreams that we lend to those who need them when theirs are not available. That's why we wrap ourselves in them and escape into them. And in a world where there are no more walking legends, stories like Amina's and so many others are all the more important. And as important as they are, it almost makes me feel bad to have to rank them. It feels a bit disingenuous. But I promised a ranking, so here we go. I give The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty a 4 out of 5 stars. And I would recommend this book to anyone who enjoys historical fantasy, fantastical and mysterious soft magics, a respectful blend of cultures, religions, and communities. Don't let my ranting chase you off if you watch this before reading it. It really is a good book, and these are trivial nitpicks, which I fully expect you to tear me apart for in the comments once you read it. Now, with all of this talk of legends and stories and dreams and things, whose legend are we experiencing next? Well, for the month of April, we are reading The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie, her first novel and the original appearance of Hercule Poirot. I have a love of Poirot from watching the PBS show starring David Suchet with my grandma as a kid, but have only managed to read a couple of his stories, this being one of them. Yes, it's another reread for Will this month, but it's my last of the year. The story takes us to Styles Court, the home of Emily Inglethorpe, a wealthy woman in her 70s who recently helped some refugees from Belgium escape the First World War and move to the English countryside. Among them, Hercule Poirot, a former Belgian police officer and master detective. So, when a mutual friend of Poirot and Emily's, Arthur Hastings, comes to visit Styles Court, everything should work out lovely. Except for Emily's sudden murder, and the start of Poirot's career as a private detective in England. The Mysterious Affair at Styles was written in 1916 and published in novel form in 1920, putting it into public domain in the States, but not in its home country of the United Kingdom, not until 2046. As such, you can find it for free at Project Gutenberg with several free ebook formats. The Kindle edition is free as well, and there's a paperback, hardcover, and Audible version all available at Amazon, though I attach the same caveat as last month. If you're going to go with an e-edition, get it elsewhere so you own it properly. I will be reading the Kindle version as I picked it up for free along with the Audible version during a promotion back when they first launched WhisperSync for voice. You know, the tech that lets you go back and forth from audiobook to ebook and it syncs up. Yeah, I'm old. Kobo also has the ebook as well, but for $2.99, so maybe hit up Project Gutenberg instead. Links in the description. As always, remember to also check your local library. Libby, Hoopla, and of course, the best option, supporting your local bookstore of choice. Real quick, subscribe here. Last month's book club review is here. Last week's Liam is there. And until I see you next time, go enjoy a book.